about Industry Insight, started back in the early 90s, late 80s, as I said, working for the cement industry. Data back then was scarce, very difficult to find. Everything was hard copies, national data, etc. So we relied on a lot of the official data. We used Stats SA information extensively. Yes, there are flaws in the data, there are errors, there are margins of errors, etc. But that is probably the best official source that we can use. And Stats SA has progressed to the point where there really is a lot of information published by Stats SA. If you drill a little bit deeper, if you go onto their site when they publish information, go take a look. Sometimes they publish additional addendums, additional reports that gives you a lot more detail than what you would just see in the media. Construction-related detail. We use the Reserve Bank, of course. They're the official national accounts data for what's happening in the construction industry. And that's probably where you hear the most of what's going on in construction. When the GDP numbers are released, how does the construction sector do? The gross fixed capital formation numbers, all of that are probably what is most known to people that are not looking at the sector in detail. And then National Treasury has made enormous strides in getting monitoring of construction activity, or should we rather say infrastructure activity, at provincial and local government. In the past, we basically had the national stuff, and you kind of had to guess, well, where is that money going? There has really been a great advancement in terms of provincial and local government. So as far as what's going on in that, there's a detailed local government expenditure data set that we developed using National Treasury. The way they publish it, though, gives you little snapshot views. But what we've done is we've built data sets around that. So we can, because to us, an economist, really it's the trend. It's that, okay, have I just come down a hill or up a hill when I look at the back to try and give me an idea? You have to understand the trends. Where are we? To try and understand that. So I think in terms of our official stats, we are way better off than what we were in the past. But through my years in the industry, 20 odd years ago, I approached a company called Databuild. Some of you might be familiar with them. They give lead information about where are the tenders, and where are the tenders in terms of what town it is, what municipality it is, what provinces it is, who's the client, what kind of project it is. And I approached them back when Stats SA had very limited information. And I said, look, we need to understand the industry better. We can't always assume KwaZulu-Natal is 15%, or you make these broad assumptions. So we developed with Databuild, then they said, okay, I'm not tendering on any projects, it's not what I'm interested in. I want to know, were there 20 tenders this month and 25 next month, etc. So we've developed through this partnership with Databuild, we now have a 20-year history of construction activity. Obviously, it's stronger on the public sector side because those projects are theoretically in the public domain. But there's a lot of private projects as well. Databuild has good relationship with architects and engineers, etc. It's their core business to source where are the projects. So we piggyback on that. So we have a lot of detail that we've built through that database that gives us perhaps a little bit more of a micro, shorter to medium term outlook for construction. We do our own ground research. We ask contractors who supplies what material on your project. I always say you can pay me R1 million. I don't think I would do that job. Fortunately, I have a lady working for me that is excellent in doing that. So she sources the materials, who supplies what on what site, and through that we kind of get an idea. We're not allowed to say market share. If there's anybody here from Competition Commission, we're not monitoring market share. We basically monitor the exposure of a material supply to a project. And we do that for the cement industry and paint and scaffolding and formwork, etc. But also through that research, we get to talk to contractors. So we can also ask them, so how are you experiencing the mafia? How are you experiencing women in the industry? Are you feeling more upbeat? Are you feeling more negative? So we also have that ear, based on all this data, that we can then bounce off of contractors actually working on active projects. We do work for the consulting engineers, for CISA, their biannual capacity survey, we do twice a year. And SAFSEC, the Forum for Civil Engineering Contractors, they seem to be reviving, and they're also going to start doing or start redoing their in-house surveys to also get a better understanding of what is really happening in the civil industry from contractors in terms of turnover, employment, etc. Because the one shortfall in the official numbers is they always just publish construction. There's one industry, and there isn't one industry. Construction is two definite: public building and civil. And the two can go into complete opposite directions. So that's a good thing that SAFSEC is doing that, so we have a better understanding of the employment, etc. And then we are also a member of the Construction Industry Economist Forum, which is the Bureau of Economic Research, Roeder and Associates, Dr. Elsie Snyman. I always see if somebody nods, then I know how long you've been in the industry. Nobody been here that long. Well, Dr. Elsie Snyman is a well-known building economist in Stellenbosch. So we all get together on a quarterly basis. And then it's a little bit of, I'll show you yours if you show me mine, and we then compare. So that's independent research. You have to be a primary researcher in construction, so you bring unique data to the table, and then we compare. And I must say, maybe last year there was a bit more of a debate, but that's because we're in a era of change, and then with change comes uncertainty. Some are saying, no, it's not going to happen. Everything's just going to go the way it's always gone. And then, there's others, admittedly, like me, that say, no, I feel something's changing. There's tremors. Something is changing. So we always then debate and kind of walk out with some agreement, like where the industry is going. So that's our other ear. And then, of course, we also have the media, and to see what the media is saying. Very difficult to keep up to date. Every time you open a newspaper, every time you switch on a TV, what are the words you hear? Infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. Everybody that stands behind a podium, we are going to increase infrastructure. We're going to increase service delivery. Never the how, but just, the will is there. In some degree, the will is there. But obviously putting it into implementation. So if you are in construction, and you are having a strategic planning session and you are just going on what you've read in the news, you are probably going to be in trouble. So what is the size of the industry? Well, according to the Reserve Bank, the gross fixed capital formation numbers, the official number, it's about 385 billion a year. Of that, we estimate about 80 billion didn't actually penetrate the construction industry. So if you're a contractor, that wouldn't have affected your business because it relates to machinery and equipment that is imported, especially with the renewable energy drive. Oh my gosh, I've just lost my earring. Apologies for that. I'm shaking my head too much. I'm going to get myself balanced for a moment. And I'll rather take off than put on. Okay. Typical women presenter. Yeah? We have extra problems to worry about. Okay, so that goes into the renewable energy sector, and then especially when we had this increase in renewable investment, that really affected the gross fixed capital formation numbers that came out. That wasn't really a true reflection of what was going on in construction. We're about 5% of GDP expenditure. We're only about 34% of total fixed investment in the country, construction. The private sector, an important client, over 200 billion in 23. Government spent about 119 billion, and the SOE is about 63 billion. Our labor force is about 1.3 million. And interestingly, some of the provinces last year, for the first 3 quarters, have already exceeded their record highs in terms of the labor force. So really good progress in some of the provinces. Profits still very low. It's a tough industry, competition is really strong, average probably around about 3%. Construction is a low profit environment, we know that, but 7 or 8% is where we kind of were in the build up to the World Cup I think that's probably the ideal margin for a contractor would be 7 to 8%. We're under 3% at the moment still, and construction costs probably hover around 6 to 8%. So after listening to 1,000 interviews and reading 1,000 media reports last year, the construction industry, according to the latest GDP numbers, the first 3 quarters of last year, was still one of the poorest performing sectors. Fell by about 7%, and agriculture 20%. So agriculture was the only sector that beat us. So that was quite disappointing. We really thought this time last year that the construction sector would actually perform a little bit better. But as I warned, something in those numbers are also being distorted by the machinery and equipment that came off a much higher base in 2023. So as we go through the presentation, we'll explain it, but still, I think we were hoping for a slightly better performance in construction. So if we look at a long-term view, it's one of my favorite charts when we look at the construction industry. So I joined around about this phase. So sympathy for me for the first 20 odd years when I was presenting, it was just, oh, it's going to be worse. Oh, it was worse. Oh, it might be better. No, it was worse. The trend lines were just completely collapsing. But at that time, that was kind of our peak in construction. And I remember a lot of people say, will we ever pass that boom cycle, that peak in construction? And eventually when you kind of come here, you go, no, I don't know. There's a lot of change has to happen. Can't really see it. Do you think we'll ever import cement? No. Why would we ever import cement? Learned a lesson younger days that I'll be a lot more diplomatic going forward. But then in 2000, we lost about 80 billion in real terms in investment over a 20-year period. Then we got the World Cup. And it caught everybody by surprise. Nobody was prepared for what happened in the construction industry, because in just 7 years, so we lost 80 billion over 20 years, in just 7 years, investment more than doubled. Nobody was prepared. And what happened? We are importing cement. So, of course, that was something that when that started happening, I knew then that we're never going to get rid of the imports. They are here to stay. Manufacturers don't like it. I don't think we'll ever really get rid of them. But we more than doubled to over 350 billion over a very short period of time. Yes, the World Cup, of course, we built massive stadiums. You can debate whether or not that was good or wrong. But there was a retail boom. There was a property boom. Confidence levels were at 80% plus. The economy was growing by 5%. Investment was growing by 10%. Profits were at 7-8%. It was a beautiful heyday for industry. And then after that, this is where we're sitting at the moment at about 250, probably about 100 billion rand down from that peak. So now the question is, what's happening? Are we doing that? Are we doing that? Everybody's guess is as good as mine. I still believe that the one golden nugget we haven't unlocked in the South African construction sector is the private sector. And load shedding was the best thing that ever happened. I thought it was tremendously romantic at some stage. But if we didn't have that, we wouldn't have had this renewable drive. We wouldn't have had government saying, please come rescue us, private sector. We need you to come build the energy. So if we don't have this infrastructure deficit that we are sitting, this perfect storm, where it's transport, it's rail, it's energy, it's everything that is just basically slowly collapsing. And government just don't have the means to invest in infrastructure. Why? Because the second best thing that probably happened is going into junk status. And I said, we waited too long to go into junk status. And I know that's a horrible thing to say, but if you look at it practically, we were borrowing money to invest. And we were borrowing, obviously, a lot of money to also put into back pockets at the time. But we were investing using borrowed money. So when junk status hit, that just completely, the public sector infrastructure took a nosedive. because now we can't borrow money. So now what is that doing? It's opening the door to the private sector to actually come in and help with specifically economic infrastructure, which ultimately can then help the government to invest more into things like social infrastructure, which is completely being neglected at the moment because everybody's trying to get the economic infrastructure going. So maybe in the long term, when we look in that back rear window 20 years from now, and there's another someone standing here talking to you, they will say, that was the catalyst that pushed investment to 700 billion. We don't know. What I spoke about the gross fixed capital formation numbers, when you hear the GDP numbers being released, and we compare that to the, if you are following Stats SA data at all, they publish a quarterly financial stats every quarter for every sector, and the construction is one of them. They break it up between small, medium, and large contractors. So it's a very interesting data set to follow. They also give you the average profit margins for small, medium, and large. Now, to them, a large company is more than 350 million, which it's not, you're not just looking at listed companies. Above 350 million, perhaps, is also for many, smallish kind of company. You wouldn't put them in a large company for construction. But you can get that kind of detail if you're interested in that. But what we have noticed, that monitors turnover in construction. So what has got into the pockets of contractors. And generally, if you look at some of the historical trends, your investment in construction should kind of follow your turnover, but we've started seeing that relationship deteriorating in the last 2 years. And that is where we've seen the drive in renewable investment. So you've seen that in the gross fixed capital formation numbers. But the industry wasn't really following suit. Turnover wasn't really following suit. If you look at the confidence levels of civil and building contractors, that wasn't there. So if that was the reality of the construction industry, why was everybody still feeling so negative? So again, it's that other equipment that is going in there that is not actually, and in a big renewable project, there's only a small portion that really goes to the construction industry. When we started renewables, 2010, 11, there were some renewable projects that started. When we just started load shedding, there were a few projects. It didn't really make the construction industry that excited because only about 10% goes to the pocket of the contractor. So this is where we're saying the industry turnover is about 305 billion. So if you are monitoring construction, don't just use the gross fixed capital formation numbers. Go and look at those quarterly financial stats as well. And this is just to show it in a different format, year-on-year change on a quarterly basis. So that's where the gross fixed capital formation numbers for construction, now that is residential, non-residential, and civils. That is the growth that we saw in terms of the GFC numbers, but this is what we saw in actual turnover for construction. So turnover was falling by 14%, although our official numbers for GFC was saying an increase of 7%. So you can understand where a lot of that uncertainty comes in, and a lot of that, but this is what's happening, and we're not feeling this, and there's a lot of uncertainty around this. But the good news is, as we moved into the 3 quarters for last year, so that's where the gross fixed capital formation numbers are coming off that higher base. We have less renewable, and we don't have that same growth spurt that we saw, coming off a lower base. But this is where we're going in terms of change in actual turnover in the construction industry. So we grew by 4.4% real terms in September. Nominal, that was 10.8%. That was the best year-on-year quarter increase since 2015 that we've seen, not taking the adjustment post-COVID. So that was a very strong increase in turnover.
I don't know if you'll take questions.
I think the questions are after.
Okay.
But please don't forget. So the question is, and just quickly coming back to that, we also saw in the 3rd quarter of last year strong increase in the labour force. The labour force increased by 15% quarter on quarter. It was a similar 4% year on year. A positive increase in the labour force, and we also saw a significant change in confidence levels amongst contractors. So if I had to put my bet on a data point to follow, it would be the construction turnover published by Stats SA. So the question is South Africa on the verge of a construction boom? I think all of you have seen probably articles related to that. Don't know if you read them. I read the first few lines and then I make my own opinion. Also typical woman. But my short answer would be no. If you thought of a verge of a boom, that's where that 2003 was. And we're just, going towards the sky. I don't think we're there. And the but, I'm an economist as well. We always have a but. We'll discuss as we go through the presentation. So we'll have our final comments on this at the end of the presentation. But my short answer is no. Do we want to be at the verge of a construction boom? No, we don't. I can see someone going, what? No. We do not want a boom-bust cycle in construction. That is not the way to create sustainable growth in the construction industry. If we now had another doubling up of investment over a very short period of time, what is it going to do to skills, capacity? We've lost listed companies unable to do the work. So who's going to come in and do a lot of that work perhaps? Do we really want to entrench foreign contractors? I don't know if they are. I'm sorry, I don't want to offend anybody. It's unavoidable. But do we really want that to be? Do we really want to become net importers of materials because we can't provide ourselves? So we do not want. Some of our presentations back in the days was, it's already half an hour ago. Okay. Some of our presentations was the risk of more growth. Can you believe we had presentations like that? So no, we don't want a boom. We want slow, steady, sustainable growth in construction. So two important things for investment to take place, which is why I'm also saying we're not at the verge of a boom. You have to have business confidence. You have to have investor sentiment. Above at least a 50 neutral level. Half people aren't positive, the other half is. At the bare minimum, you actually need it above, more closer to 60 or 70. The majority of people must be confident in the growth prospects of the economy and working conditions. Then you have to be able to afford it. So you might be really confident, but if you can't afford it, you don't have access to finance, cash flow, borrowing, investment opportunities, you're also not going to invest. You might be able to afford it, interest rates are low, you can borrow money, but I don't think I really like Ferraris, so I'm not going to buy one, even if you can afford it. You might think, gosh, I love Ferraris, it's all I want, but if you can't afford it, you're also not going to buy it. And investment is exactly the same, but even worse, because you can swing a Ferrari a year later. A long-term investment, you really have to take a long-term view. You want a return on investment, you have to be sure. Both of these have to be there. We had that in the build-up to the World Cup. Affordability was good, borrowing, interest rates, confidence levels were there, and we had the boom. We're not there at this point in time. So just, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but yeah, where we were this time last year, confidence levels were really depressed, and affordability was a real issue in terms of even if we just take the interest rates. Where are we now? At least we can say we're slightly better. We're not great, but we're slightly better. Confidence levels has started to improve. It reached 45 fourth quarter of last year. Business confidence peaked to 45. Very good rate. Hope that could be sustained going forward. And of course, affordability is starting to move in the right direction with interest rates coming down. Just to show you the confidence levels back in the heyday of the World Cup sitting at 80%, and then from there onwards, we have not surpassed a level of 50 since that time. And that explains the dearth in private investment and a lot of the other issues that we are having. But then in the last few quarters, up until there, that's annual, this is just the last 3 quarters, we steadily increased our confidence levels. That trust, confidence is gradually starting to improve. That's very good news. But if we rocked up to 60 next quarter, it's still going to take 12 to 14 months before we are really going to see the impact in terms of investment and turnover, etc. There's lots of, in construction, there are long leads and lags that are in play. So again, it's not all about the prime rate. I know everybody's prime rate, are they going to cut interest rates this year? But it's not all about the prime rate, because even when interest rates were low, that wasn't enough to improve business confidence. I think what really should be the key for government and leaders, etc., in this country is to how to restore that investor sentiment. How do we get trust back? How do we get confidence back? Interest rate plays actually a very small part. It helps for consumers, DIY, retailers, that kind of thing. It helps. It can unlock a little bit of economic growth, but not what we need to really get investment going in this country. I don't want to spend too much time on interest rates. We're going to know soon enough. I do think that he's going to cut by another 25 basis points for the following reasons. Our real rate, which is the difference between interest rates and inflation, is sitting at a 20-year high of 8%, and our inflation is sitting at very low levels by historic terms. So very high real rates, low interest rates really creates the scope for the Reserve Bank to cut interest rates. If we talk about this, it's going to probably take too long. I don't want to waste too much time on it. Yes, an hour is not enough. But we have to understand, so when you listen to the news and the Reserve Bank, and they talk about the monetary policy, and you're going to hear people attacking from all corners, etc. Remember this, the Reserve Bank's mandate is to protect the value of the currency. They have set inflation targets in place so that they can use interest rates to manipulate the supply of money, to protect the value of the currency. That is their core mandate, not to grow the economy and all those nice things. But to protect the value of the currency is very difficult and we can go through these. At 2010 kind of out, when the Zuma era also started, confidence levels plummeted, investment started shrinking from a private sector point of view, and then 2017 hit junk status, and that had another impact on our currency. The focus really should be, and there are a lot of reasons why the currency depreciates, but one of our biggest concerns is the domestic policy. So we have to restore the value of our currency. Our currency must become an attractive currency. And how do we do that? We have to attract foreign direct investment. Fortunately, last year, we might actually end up in a net increase in foreign direct investment. Third quarter last year, we had our first net positive inflow of portfolio investment in 2 years. So maybe some of the stuff that Ramaphosa is saying, and investment summits, and although maybe it's starting to come into play. Maybe that is something that can take us forward. Very important, so that we are not constantly just waiting to hear what the US is saying. It's like, why do you want to read the Reserve Bank? Just follow the Federal Reserve. That's all that really matters to the Reserve Bank at this stage. Well, if the US isn't going to cut interest rates, then we can't. That's a domestic policy that is failing the South African environment. I know Dr. Roelof Botha, very outspoken, I don't know if you know him, very outspoken against the Reserve Bank, saying that our monetary policy is just plain wrong. The Reserve Bank is doing their job. Their job, protect the value of the currency. The other things is not the Reserve Bank's job. It's like the National Treasury. It's not their job to grow the economy. It's their job to balance the books. That's what they have to do. They have to cut expenditure. They have to make sure our debt levels are it's their job. So it's the Reserve Bank's job. It's up to government and leaders to change the perception and the value of the currency. So the Reserve Bank expects about a 1.7 increase in GDP. Now, if you want to be positive, it's double than what we had last year. Still below our population growth, so technically we're still going to get poorer. But at least if you celebrate the small things, they are expecting the economy to improve 1.7. I've seen some forecasts of even 2%, not for 25, but perhaps into 26 from the Bureau of Economic Research as well. But yeah, maybe hopefully we can reach that 2% within the next couple of years. It's a far cry from where South Africa needs to be, but steady progress. Prime rate, they are still expecting it to come down to roughly about 10%. If you're hoping for the 7% that we had post-COVID, it's not going to happen. Very unlikely. It's not sustainable. And then our inflation sitting around about that mid-target. The Reserve Bank also wants to, and here I have a problem with the Reserve Bank. I'll support you that you're doing your job, but now they want to lower the inflation target to the mid 3%. And with that I have a problem, because we are a low-growth economy. We have significantly high unemployment in this country, and we have regulated, administered prices controlled by government that is not adhering to any policy. So who are the people that are going to have to ensure we stick to a 3% target? The private sector. So to have, if government, the 5.5% wage increase, apparently for the public sector, is sitting at 5.5%. It's higher than the inflation. Energy prices, water, prices that are determined by government are not following. They're not coming to the party, which means to maintain a 3%, the private sector, it's our responsibility to maintain that target. We'd probably have to go lower to 1 to 2% to balance the ultimate. So with that, I have a problem. I think that would be premature at this stage of the game. Hopefully, that will not happen. So this is our investment portfolio, investment trend line against GDP. And here, so when you speak to people and they talk about the deficit in investment, you can you just remember this kind of picture in your mind, where those were 5% economic growth rates, 10% investment. Economic steadily crept along, but we've had this complete almost collapse in terms of investment, and we're only sitting at 4.2% of fixed investment to GDP. China is sitting at above 40%. The average for developing economies is 25 to 30%. South Africa is at the lowest, if not the lowest, investment rate in the developing economies. We have a long way to go to fix this. I just wanted to show, so when junk status hit, private sector total investment was still kind of moving along, but junk status caused the private sector, the public sector, all of a sudden the money is gone, and they were unable to continue with the budgets that were at that stage. I think we're running at 900 and something billion over a 3-year period. I think we barely did 600 or 550 billion of those budgets. So junk status, I saw Gordon Guana said we might be out of junk status by 2027. And for us to be out of junk status by 2027, it means there's going to be some real adjustments in terms of the budgets from National Treasury, because we have to really then hone in that growing debt levels that we have to satisfy the rating agencies. So that is not a job I would want either, to get that right. But at least I haven't heard anything of junk status, very little. At least there was this first kind of acknowledgement that we need to get out of junk status. So if we got out of junk status 2027 and we had private sector investment, we finally got that economic infrastructure going, our interest rates are low, confidence levels start to improve, that could actually have quite an impact on, because we will have the private investment drive coupled with public sector increase in spending. This is just to show the relationship between total investment and construction. The poor construction industry even lags very low levels of overall investment. We're sitting at about 34% of investment. So that's the broader environment that we're in. Moving into the two different areas, the civil industry, to start off with, civil industry is predominantly government-driven, economic infrastructure, your roads, your water, your airports, things like that. We can see how, especially these are quarterly numbers, how from 2017, we had some momentum going, and then it just completely almost collapsed post junk status, and the COVID didn't do us any favors, and we're basically just moving along. So we've lost about 50% since 2013-14 in terms of total investment in construction. But the interesting part is, when you look at these numbers and you feel a little bit depressed, but you look at the confidence levels among civil contractors, and that has just gone obviously below 20 since COVID at some point. It was also sitting at about 50 odd neutral level. Plotted along, and then we've seen that kind of improvement in how are civil contractors feeling about the industry. Well, they're feeling not too bad, actually. If you look at that trend line and you see it that, and that directly links with, is there tenders coming out? Are tenders perhaps being awarded? Because that was also a big problem in the industry. But this to us, so the Bureau of Economic Research published this, and we had our meeting. We are in Cape Town, so we did pop a bottle of champagne. You know, you got to make economics interesting. So we popped a bottle of champagne when we saw that, because that really is good news. It's the best level in 10 years that we've seen how contractors are feeling. The building industry, similar kind of pattern, basically that flat line in investment. If you can remember, put on top of that building confidence that was just not going anywhere. We've had COVID, and if you look at the confidence levels of contractors also, from roundabout, especially also when the junk status hit, contractors started becoming more and more negative, sitting at about a 20%, so 80% were not feeling great. We've seen some improvement, but we're not anywhere near where the civil contractors are. And that is in line with how we are seeing. Building industry is still under a lot of pressure, private sector driven, interest rates, etc., compared to the civil side where you have the government and the GNU and everything that's happened, new ministers being appointed, doing phenomenal jobs, by the way. So the one thing, and when we were here last year, we were obviously in this run-up to the election. Tenders were increasing. We were fairly upbeat, and then we said, "But there's an election coming. So what's going to happen?" So my thing is like, may I have this dance, and we call it the election. We call it the election dance. So I'm going to give, and then I'm going to take. It's almost like a lovely salsa. And they caught us again, unfortunately. So in 2009, you can see the build-up to the election, and then after the election. 2014, after the election. 2019, after the election. And Stru's nuts, 2014, after the election. So there was, economists can justify just about any data point, just to let you know. But at this point here, we were like, that increase in others, there's no way they're not going to sustain this. Listen to the news. We are in a perfect storm. We need infrastructure. Even the local government mayors are saying we're increasing delivery. There's no way. Well, when I listen to myself presenting, I wouldn't even trust myself anymore. We're not going to import cement, we're never going to surpass 84 level. But anyway, that's what data-driven is all about. They did drop the tenders post. We're down about 17% tenders compared to this is a lot of it is in the civil side. The last 6 months of 2024 compared to the same period, in the build-up to the election, it was increasing by about 10-15%. And this is the impact on the civil industry. So what we do with what we call civil tender values is trying to understand. Now, this is also when SAFSEC wasn't doing their surveys anymore, and you always have budgets. We always have budgets. But it's very hard to know about what's actually happening. So with our relationship and our partnership with DataBuild, we now get these tenders. But we always used to monitor the tenders on the number of tenders. Are there 500 tenders, 700 tenders? But what we then realize is we have to actually monitor the quality of those tenders. So we know the CIDD grading, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with. I hope so. I'm not seeing any nods. Anyway, but a CIDB grade is every contract, public sector contract goes out, has a grade 1 to 9. And we then looked at, what are the average values of contracts awarded between 1 to 9? We don't use the CIDB grades because they don't change them frequently enough. I think it's been 200 million grade 9 and more, or 8 and more since 5-6 years now. So we look at the average value of contracts awarded, and we then applied that to these contracts out of tender. So we estimate that a grade 8 contract would be about 110 million based on what has been awarded. And then we started building this data set, and that started telling us a whole different story. Because up until 2023, the value of those tenders was about 100 billion. which also correlates quite nicely with some of the other official numbers that we're seeing. And then again, after the election, those tenders subsided, the value of those tenders. What I can say is in the build-up of that, there was a lot of Sunroll activity. Sunroll really came to the party in 2023, a lot of tenders, but unfortunately what we've seen, anybody from Sunroll here? Well, I suppose if you are, you're not going to say, but 40 minutes left. Okay, so the number of Sunroll tenders that have been released so far this year is 40% lower than what it was in 2023. Still a lot of projects, 16 billion rands worth of projects, but it's significantly lower. So of course it's going to have an impact on your civil industry. But that's a pipeline, and of course the establishment of new governments, you had to go through all of that. I think that must have been a highly complex situation, national, provincial, and local. Nobody's going to sign off on a tender until you are 100% sure. And if you're newly appointed, you're not going to sign off on a tender until you have now done your investigation and you are happy, because you are accountable once your signature is on there. So how are those, what the benefits of also looking at these tenders is now we can also see how are the different provinces comparing. So just giving you a snapshot for 24, the bulk of the estimated value of tenders was about 20 billion, down from 22 billion in KwaZulu-Natal. But that had the highest value of tenders. This is roads, water, it's everything. 24%, almost a quarter of the market, but they're down 8%. Western Cape fell by almost 4 billion. Gauteng is down almost over 4 billion. And the Free State coming off quite a nice high. Sunroll really pushed into the Free State in 2023, down 46%. One little province is bucking the trend at the moment, and that is in the Northern Cape, where the value of tenders there are up about an estimated 60%. Less than 2% of the market, but yeah, well, in terms of less than 5% of the market. Small province, but yeah, big things also happening there. So, Minister of Public Works, they asked him, how are you going to transform this country into a construction site? Well, the first thing is to create a safe environment. We can debate that, whether or not that is, perhaps, is there success in that? Are we doing the right things? Are we collaborating? One thing I didn't know is that if you are arrested for extortion on a construction site, there isn't actually a description. I suppose everything works in codes in the police station. I've not been arrested, but I think so. And they didn't have a code. They don't exactly know how to categorize this crime on a construction site. Apparently they have now done that. So at least now, if you are arrested, at least now you can be properly docketed, which seems to be the first point of entry. So are we moving ahead? I think we are. Industry's coming together. It's taking them long enough to getting there. Projects that are not cancelled. That is a serious problem in government, and that comes down to planning, local and provincial. Remember, you get 1 year's budget. You have to plan ahead. You can't get your budget now and decide we're doing this, and then we've only got 1 year to do the entire process, from planning, procurement, to construction, to payment. It's impossible. Projects that are cancelled, and of course, payment on time. So if the minister can actually work on those three things to get that right, I think we would have, even then, even in the environment we're in, we're going to be a much healthier sector to work in. So projects that are not cancelled. We're not as bad as what we were in 2017, but overall our cancellations have doubled last year and beginning of end of 2023. Increasing by about 150%. During junk status, 300% increases, of course, in cancellations. Payment remains a problem. I don't have the details now of every single department. I'm pretty sure we can find it if we dig long enough. But just using local government as a proxy. Back in the days, or just not long ago, 2018, about 40% aggregated local government payments were outstanding for more than 90 days. Only about 40%. Well, 40% is too much, but only 40%. We're now sitting at close to 80%. So 80% of payments are still outstanding after 90 days. And this is after doing it. The one good thing we can say, that kind of momentum didn't carry on. There is some improvement at least. It seems like something's happening, but it's an enormous task to say payment on time. It sounds so simple. Unfortunately, it's not. And if you look at the different provinces, the aggregated local governments for each provinces, the Western Cape is sitting at 36%. They've also really gotten worse in payment, but they are the lowest across all the other provinces. Free State, 91%. Northern Cape, 90%. So shame, those poor people where the building tenders are increasing, or the civil tenders are increasing by 60%, I hope you're going to get paid. Mpumalanga, 80%, Northwest, 82%. So the average is still very high in some of these provinces. Payment is still a serious issue. So I think the problem in South Africa is we have a pipeline of projects, and we've heard this, we have a pipeline of bankable, ready projects. The problem is we don't have a pipeline of funding. Where is the money going to come from? And the Minister of Public Works said his focus for 2025 is to work with Infrastructure SA and the Infrastructure Fund to unlock specifically private sector investment in those large projects that we've seen, but also at provincial and municipal level. And I think that is really where the true benefit, that's where we're going to see, once we get those private sector, those spread out into the lower levels of government, where we can see probably more significant change. Again, sounds easy. I think it's highly complex. We are still struggling to get it right at the higher levels. So this is the budget. So when we were here last year, that was kind of the growth in budget. The economic infrastructure was going to grow by 7% on average. Social infrastructure still down 4%. Government's pushing all their money into economic infrastructure. Overall, the budget was sitting at 4.5%. So we felt a little bit more optimistic. And then in election year, the 2024 budget came out. The economic infrastructure was projected to grow by only 1.4% over the 4-year period. Social infrastructure even worse, down 6.5%, which means the outlook for the next 3 years was worse than what the previous budget was. We can be angry at National Treasury. It's all about priorities. It's National Treasury's job to balance the books. But that is the reality that we're sitting in. So if this is the outlook for public sector infrastructure in real terms, no, there can't be a boom. It's not possible. This first also has to change. Then the one thing that I found really, really interesting, I have a love for local government. I think if we can get our metros capacitated, functioning properly, service delivery going, I think it can make an enormous change, filtering further down into other governments. And we haven't really been able to monitor what's going on at local government. So as a data analyst, when we started getting all these local government data, it was fascinating to see just how bad it is in local government. Now, when you have the hard data in front of you, you cannot no longer deny it. But in last year's budget, we know there's service delivery issues. We know local government are not spending budgets. And in last year's budget, they thought it was wise to push more money, not more money, a bigger share of the pie through local government. So where 40% of the infrastructure budget went to local government, not including SOEs, just general government, where 40% went to local government, 50% is now projected. And if you look at this budget 2024, it's like really increasing going into the next 3 years. And I have to be honest, I do not understand the logic. It is not a funding problem at local government. It is a capacity problem. It is a planning. If it was a funding problem, they would want more budgets to spend more money. They're not spending the budgets they already have, generalizing most of them. So you can't push more money and say, well, you get a bit of this. Almost like provincial and central is going off. No, local governments, your problems, and that just doesn't make sense at all. If we look at the metros, just as a quick snapshot, Cape Town is the one with the highest capital budget. Now, capital isn't all construction, we know that. But capital expenditure by Cape Town is the highest, and eThekwini is sitting at the second highest level of capital expenditure. Mangahoon's budget increased by 40% for the 2024-25 period. They couldn't even spend 50% of their budget last year. But they have increased their budget. Now, either there's something going on that we don't know about, but surely that does raise a question. Overall budgets were up around about 6.5%, with Buffalo the only one that's actually cutting the budget. Maybe that is the way to go. Cut your budgets, but spend it. Plan properly. I think that's, manage those expectations. And then a lot of heated debate in Tshwane over the last few years, of course. Tshwane and Ekurhuleni both, the size of their capital budget to total spending is only sitting at 5%. So when you hear Tshwane speaking and saying we're going to increase infrastructure and we're going to increase service delivery, just ask your question yourself, how are they going to do it when 5% of their budget is going to capital? Are they attracting private investment? What are they going to do? I'm not saying they're not. It's just it's questionable with only 5% of your budget going to capital. So within that capital, you've got housing, roads, water, it's in that budget. Cape Town is sitting at 16% of their budget goes to capital. It's very important, of course, to sustain that. They've always been, lately they've been above 10% going forward and increasing it to 16%, above the metro average of 10%. So these kind of dynamics, very interesting. I don't want to spend too much time on, this is the combined for all the metros. Basically, road transport budget is up 17%, from 6.5 to 7.6, but they couldn't spend 2.3 billion of that budget last year. The wastewater management down 6%. Water management was up 26, but they also 740 million they could not spend. So overall, metros underspent by 7 billion rand in the 23-24 period. So margins, we spoke about that briefly. This might not be so relevant to this group, but as we can see, the low profits environment, there was some improvement 23-24. A lot of that, this kind of growth here was driven by smaller and medium-sized companies. It didn't last very long. They very quickly shifted into an overall loss. But the bigger contractors are certainly feeling the pinch. They are underperforming against the industry average and currently sitting at less than 1% average profitability. So an industry that is under severe pressure. And if we just look at the grade 9 contractors, if we take that as a proxy, the number of grade 9 contractors that are registered on the CIDB from October 24 to July 23 increased by almost 40%. So that's an additional pool of contractors that can tender on projects with unlimited value. 75% of them are potentially emerging contractors. Transformation is taking place. But the problem is, if Sunroll's grade 9 contracts, for example, are taking a 40% dip over the last year, we have a 40% increase in grade 9 contractors. You can imagine why these big contractors are under so much pressure in terms of. So my opinion is, don't make it so easy to become a grade 9 contractor. CIDB should update those 200 million. A 200 million rand project and a 3 billion rand project. Some say no, it's very similar. I don't know. I'm not a contractor. I would imagine not. Make it perhaps a little bit more difficult. At least the listed sector, their market values fell from 80 billion and market capitalization values on the JSE to about 30 billion. So they've taken a really hard knock. But we have seen a little bit of an improvement last year, sitting at the best levels also in 15, since 2015. So the investors did perhaps perceive some value in the construction industry in South Africa. Another positive point that we can make, as I said, we work with with CISA and doing their biannual capacity surveys. Engineers are feeling more optimistic. And I've always said when this happened, and I've seen as I said, I've lived through a 20-year downturn when I started. When I saw the engineers becoming more and more depressed from 2010 onwards, because that says to you there's no planning, there's no projects in preparation. Engineers are generally more optimistic. nobody's saying anything. But I perceived them, because even when contractors were negative, engineers were positive. But what was happening then? There was a lot of planning going on. Engineers were busy planning, but it didn't go through to the construction industry. There was a lapse between what we're planning and what we're actually implementing. But that also means if the engineers are not busy, what does it mean to the contractors now? There's not even a potential. I seriously considered a different job when I started seeing this kind of trend lines, because I was just like, how are we going to? But then, of course, fortunately, from the last 2 years of surveys that we've done for CISA, like I said, there's this tremor, we can feel change, and engineers are becoming a little bit more positive. So we're also sitting at the highest rate now on average. Over 80% of engineers are positive, satisfied or better. And that's the best also in 10 years. So at least we know there's planning. Now we can only pray and hope that that planning comes through to construction. They're also looking for the first time in many years, more engineers are looking to increase engineers. Very difficult to find the proper skills, proper technical requirements for engineers. And the most difficult to find are female engineers from a previously disadvantaged background. They're sitting at over 70 or 74%, on average 93%. Slightly better than last year, but still very difficult, and the most difficult to find. So engineers are feeling better. Their order books are also looking better. The order books have increased to a ratio of about 2 to 1, 1.8 to 1. So the order books are there, feeling more positive, looking to employ engineers. So all in all, that does tell us that there is something brewing. The building industry, I don't want to spend too much time on that, but the private sector really is the key driver in the building industry. And for that, we need lower interest rates, we need higher confidence. We've already spoken a little bit about that. But we can see there is a general relationship. For those of you that say, no, the building approvals are, it's not always accurate and you can't trust it. Well, if you monitor that against the overall investment that is published by the Reserve Bank, of course, in the building side of the gross fixed capital formation numbers, residential, non-residential, there you don't have the state-owned enterprises and renewable and machinery equipment. So you can trust that a little bit more. But if we follow and we say, well, if we trust the building plans passed and we can kind of see it, where we are now, there's really only one way for investment to still go, and that is to contract at this point in time. The non-residential market is starting to make a turn. They're up 4%. The residential market is still down 12%. So where's the growth coming from the non-residential market? The retail, demand for retail is up 19%. Western Cape, Eastern Cape, Northern Cape, Northwest, and Gauteng. 5 of the 9 provinces are actually showing an increase in retail. Industrial space is up about 3.5%, specifically in those 4 provinces. Offices are still down 50%. Demand for office space, we know, under severe pressure. But in areas like Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, and Mpumalanga, there is actually robust growth going on for office space. So construction is not easy. And data analysis certainly isn't easy. It's not a blueprint. It's not a one-shoe-fits-all. You have to go and look where are growth opportunities, because they are still there. Non-residential approvals, as I said, is showing the strongest increase, but we may have had a lower turning point in building approvals. We're still falling by 10%, but the rate of decline at least is better than where we were. That, of course, was all driven by the whole COVID, moving around, office space renovations, etc., low interest rates, which really helped single dwellings, multi-unit housing developments. But yeah, we are hopefully if I'm here next year, this time I hope all of you are here, almost, that we can actually see that the building approvals are back in the black, and that we can start seeing that in investment 12 to 18 months from now. The Western Cape Gauteng market, very interesting. Gauteng used to be double the size of Western Cape, and now the Western Cape is at a higher demand for private sector investment than Gauteng. Western Cape has already made a stronger turnaround. Gauteng kind of is still thinking about it. But that's very interesting dynamics, how for the first time in history in 2022, the Western Cape market exceeded Gauteng. KwaZulu-Natal is an interesting one for me, really. I feel that I'm where we were last year, where change is coming. I've spoken to some people at some conferences, and you'd show some of these numbers. They have the highest number of building approvals, building civil tenders coming out, etc. But there was still this very low confidence in KwaZulu-Natal, that sense of, don't know if implementation is possible, there's still too much corruption, there's still too much this, whatever. But it seems like there's a change coming, and they're having a building a better KwaZulu-Natal building better something conference now in the next 5 days or so, where they are trying to restore the inner city facades, government buildings, really making an effort to do that. There's sense that things are starting. I really like Martin May. I think he's doing a fabulous job. He's the MEC of KwaZulu-Natal Public Works, a little mini-me of McPherson, where they're really hands-on. They're there, they're on sites, they try and understand. There was a problem with payment. They were rioting in front of the KwaZulu-Natal, and he actually invited all those people in, put them around the table and said, what's the problem? That's the kind of hands-on, get to action-based. And even though KwaZulu-Natal has not shown a real increase overall, if we look at the tenders that have come out, it's high tenders. And I think change is coming to KwaZulu-Natal. KwaZulu-Natal also, at this point in time, is the province that is showing the strongest increase in multi-unit housing developments, up 40% last year, completely surpassing the other provinces. So someone else is also thinking, some big residential developers are also thinking that there's change coming. Social infrastructure, we've run out of excuses for government on why is government not investing in social infrastructure. I guess if we can free government's hands from economic infrastructure, try and get the private sector more involved, that can free finances to actually put into social infrastructure. Housing, education, hospitals, police stations, prisons, courts. That's dropped by 55%. Government used to invest about 90 billion. We're now sitting at less than 50 billion in real terms that are going into these critical areas. And it showed. Remember, your economic infrastructure, Eskom, Transnet, people living, people that vote, people on everyday lives. Do I have a school? Do I have a clinic? Is there a police station? Is there enough schools for our children? That is what is taken to. And when I hear when they say, well, we don't know what really happened with the elections, we need to do introspection and whatever, you just show them this one slide. Voter participation was the problem. 76% of voters turned out in 2004. And if you compare that with how we are starting to collapse in terms of infrastructure, with only 58% arriving for voters, people just don't see why would I vote? Don't have a school. It's the social fiber, I think, that government is missing. In terms of infrastructure, there's social infrastructure that we really need. And of course, for the building industry, that is very important. The public sector now represents 61% of total investment in non-residential buildings. It's an important client. It's a bigger client of a smaller cake, but it's an important client. We've already spoken about this. The human settlement budget is projected to decrease in real terms. Education is going to fall in real terms the next 3 years. Health infrastructure is going to fall in the next 3 years, which unfortunately is a problem. So the same way that we monitor the civil side, we also monitor public building tenders to try and understand what is going on. And again, we have seen a nice run-up in the value of tenders that was coming sitting at about 27 odd billion. And then after the election, we saw that a similar decline in public building. 3 provinces are backing it. Gauteng seems to increase public sector spending on buildings. 25% up the estimated value of those tenders that came out. Northwest is up about 35%, and then the Western Cape is up about 60%. So the Western Cape is sitting in a very good position. Why? Because we're seeing a faster turnaround in terms of private sector demand, and we're seeing a strong increase in terms of public tenders coming out. And that is really where you want to be, both clients. So what does this mean for a pipeline? So we take all of this information and we package that into a provincial forecast to try and understand where the construction sector is going. We use approvals, we use completions from the private sector, we use tenders and awards from government sector, and then we put all of this in one pot and say, well, if we add all of this, what is the pipeline? The actual pipeline, not what is being said at a podium. What is the actual pipeline of actual demand, actual projects that were actually approved by local government, tenders that were actually submitted? What is the pipeline for the South African construction industry? And then how does it change over a 12-month period? So the pipeline was sitting at about 100 or to over 220 billion round about September 2023. When we were here last, we were sitting at about a 4% growth, so we still saw a positive increase in that pipeline, double-digit growths at one stage, but then we've gradually seen, so the pipeline at the moment is sitting at about 197 billion rand of actual projects that have gone through some or other authority to get here. And it's fallen now by 12%. So that is a bit of a concern. So we're hoping the engineers that are so busy that will come through, we're hoping that as interest rates lower, that there will be an increased demand for private sector to turn this around. Because this, what this tells you is that in 12 months from now, once all of that has been implemented and those projects are ongoing, and that pipeline is going to start biting us in the butt. I have not much time left. So again, just how does this pipeline change at a provincial level? These slides will be made available. So yeah, you can have a look at that. How is the pipeline changing? And I think the change that we probably have to also take note of is KwaZulu-Natal. It's very strong growth in KwaZulu-Natal, but just basically ending flat. Western Cape is down 20%. The pipeline in Western Cape is significantly lower than what it was 12 months ago. So some interesting dynamics, and I think these are the two. Eastern Cape's pipeline was growing quite well. A lot of it's driven by the civil sector, but this is KwaZulu-Natal. So that's why I'm again saying I'm quite excited about what's going to happen. Up until recently, it was growing by more than 20% per annum. So the projects that are announced, this is the media that we follow, that we all take with a pinch of salt, but you know, we have spare time in a day, so we decided, well, let's log all these projects and keep tabs on them. Big projects announced, 659 billion. That's almost double the total investment in construction. And that was up 48% from what was announced in 2023. So there's a lot of, well, I've just read this morning again that some of those green steel projects might not happen. That Sasol and Mittal, of course, were planning. Those are, I always say that 659 is just, you know, promises. It's announcements. There's by no means that those projects are actually going to take place. But at least it is a thought, it was spoken about, it was enough to put it in the media. Positive. And private and public-private sector projects are probably 70% of that, which is the right way in which we need to move. If those announcements, so that is no guarantee that that's going to happen. If the announcements were going the other way, it is a guarantee that nothing was going to happen. So as Ramaphosa said at the World Economic Forum, we are pregnant with promise. And I listened to that and I was like, yo, I almost got goosebumps. Yeah. Do you know that someone that's pregnant, Mr. Ramaphosa, needs to deliver at some point? You cannot be pregnant forever. So, so I think we're an industry at a lower turning point. I think there is promise. We are moving in the right direction, slowly but surely, and we can see it in our confidence levels, business confidence bit better, consulting engineers are better, and that perhaps sets, I think this probably sets the best platform going into 2025. Our forecasts, you can have a look at those. These are still preliminary. We haven't done our final forecasts yet. But we're still positive about the civil industry. I think there's still going to be a delay on the non-residential side. We're still in the negative territory. But overall, hopefully by 2026, and now I sound like someone that's preparing a budget, you know, you always move that horizon. Wait another 2 years, then maybe we'll see some growth. But I think realistically, based on what we know, that's our best best guess estimate. So no, we are not on the verge of a construction boom for the reasons that I hope you have followed and understood. But I think from an economic point of view, from a political point of view, we are certainly on a better path. Government just has to understand it's not their job. It's not their job to create jobs. That's the private sector's job. But I think we are creating an environment, perhaps, that is more conducive. We have a long way to go. But the political will, I think, is there more than what it was this time last year. We just have to manage our own expectations. We do not want boom because we do not want busts. At this point of the game, we want slow, gradual, sustainable growth with a business partner in government that allows the private sector to do what it needs to do. And that is my story. I'm in time. Yes.